Welcome back to the Law&Crime Network. I'm Carissa Kranz. Right now we're watching riveting testimony, really sad, emotional testimony in the trial that we're following out of Florida. This is the case where a baby, Aiden McClendon, was caught. Aiden McClendon was caught in gang crossfire and was shot dead when his cousin was the actual target. Really sad. Right now we just had opening statements, and then we had the mother of Aiden on the stand, emotional testimony, she was crying, and now we have the great-grandmother. There he is on the screen. Isn't he adorable? His life was stolen from him way too young. And this is a trial that is bringing us to the streets of what goes on with these federal gang cases. And it is important to note that he was 22 months old, and he was sitting in his family's car in the front of their home in Jacksonville, Florida. His mother and his great-grandmother was also in the car when he was shot and killed in this gang-related shooting. His cousin was a member of a rival gang and the target. In addition to the murder charges brought, one thing that's really interesting is these are two co-defendant cases. So there's two juries in this case. And you'll see as we watch this, jurors are being asked to leave because they can't hear what the other jury is supposed to hear because both defendants are being tried together. I don't want to take any more time away, so let's go. Okay. With us also is our very special guest, Kenney Baden, criminal defense attorney.
Hi, Krista. Nice to see you again, but a terrible case, terrible circumstances.
I know. It's so sad. It makes me want to cry just
you
watching
were crying.
it.
You were crying in the break. I'll let everybody know the secret. You were.
It's heart-wrenching to watch a baby helpless, and you just heard the testimony of the grandmother. Were there any noises? And she just lost it, and she said, aghast.
And think about the fate of this poor child being caught dead in this crossfire. The mother wasn't supposed to pick up his great-grandmother. That's fate. The great-grandmother happened to have her head down on the floorboards picking up her things, so she didn't get shot. It's so random. There's so much fate, and you just say, why?
Why? And the fact that the mother was able to keep it together and drive away while this was going on because the shots were still firing. It's such an awful, heart-wrenching case. I mean, I don't know how it could be a not guilty unless we haven't heard about these defenses yet, but I can't imagine the jurors not wanting to hold someone accountable in this case, but it's too soon to tell.
There's some days that it's good for us to wear black on the set. This is one of these days.
I know. We match.
This is terrible. Terrible, terrible. Random violence, terrible.
I know. So right now, in the courtroom, they are playing the 911 call. So let's go in and listen to that call and hear what they had to say. Welcome back to Law&Crime. I'm Carissa Kranz. That was testimony in the Wisconsin Tate trial. This is our main trial, and we are following this one today with opening statements and the prosecution's putting on their case. That was the witness who found the body of the victim. Remember, this is the case where the victim was choked and strangled, and her head was held underwater at Lake Michigan by the defendant, Daniel Tate, and his alleged accomplice. However, Jamari Cook, the accomplice, is a prosecution witness in this case. Be really, really interesting to hear from him soon. With me on set is our special guest, Kenney Baden. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks.
So, any thoughts on this case so far?
Yeah, you know, when I was reading this last night before I started watching it on the air, it reminds me almost of a long time ago. There's a famous case in New York that Linda Fairstein was on called the Chambers Preppy murder case, where he alleged that through rough sex, that's how somebody died, that it wasn't an intentional murder. And I think that's where they're going to go here, that there's some kind of rough play sex. That's the only defense I can see, unless you want to say the co-defendant did it.
Well, and the judge,
not working.
Before opening statements leading up to this, the judge heard testimony and weighed in on whether or not he would allow evidence to come in that he had a propensity or a modus operandum to use strangulation during sex, and he did say that he likes to get freaky. So we'll hear about that. Do you think that that's just too probative or prejudicial?
No, it's interesting because it actually could help the defense. You know, the prosecution wants it in because he's talked about strangling people in the past, so it goes that he's the killer. But the defense can use it like he has this propensity to be freaky during sex, and therefore it was a manslaughter or an aggravated aggravated manslaughter, not a murder. This
Right.
is the only way I
Go
can
to a
see. I mean,
lesser.
it's not my case, but when I'm looking at it, that's my initial reaction.
Right. Okay, so right now we have a new witness on the stands. His name is Dale Swartz. He's an officer, so let's go back into the courtroom live and stick with us for some more in-studio analysis with our great guest. Welcome back. That was Officer Dale Swart. He was the one who found the body of Olivia McKay, the victim in this case, who was strangled and had her head held underwater in Lake Michigan in Wisconsin, and the body was dumped. So far, we've had opening statements today. We've heard from the witness who found the body in the field, and then the officer who also found the body, and then, or who responded to the body. And now we're going to be hearing from a detective, Daniel, I missed the last name, but that's who's up next on the stand. And while they're switching, I'm going to bring on my in-studio guest, Linda Kenney Baden. So, Linda, this is another awful case. We're covering this. We're having a rough day here.
It's a rough day. This kind of terrible violence against people who are young, it just tears at your heartstrings, no matter what the situation.
And both cases seem to be unintended violence in a way towards the person. Possibly, you know, it's an accident, like transferred intent in the first case out of Florida, and then this case is.
Well, this case with
who knows if he
I mean,
meant.
We don't know. We're going to listen to that. It'd be interesting to see what the medical examiner says about the cause of death, whether it's just strangulation or whether it's also ingestion of the water, whether it's drowning, as to whether or not she was dead when her head was put underwater or not. So that'll be interesting, and that'll affect how the defense argues whether or not it's a manslaughter or not. Right.
And another key thing in this case is the defendant's accomplice is a state witness. So stay tuned, because we're all going to want to hear what he has to say, and if he has some kind of deal for testifying too.
Right,
yep,
fireworks.
Lots going on. But without further ado, in the courtroom right now, you could see him on the stand. He's live, so let's go in. This is Detective Daniel, Daniel Shore. Okay, and see what he has to say. Welcome back to the Law&Crime Network. Right now, we are watching Detective Daniel Shore open some evidence in the Wisconsin trial. This is the Beach murder case, 2017 case. With me on set, on screen is Linda Kenney Baden. Right now, we don't know what is opening in that brown paper bag, but there's some evidence about to be admitted. For those of you just joining us, this is the case where a woman, Olivia McKay, 17 years old, met up with Daniel Tate and Jamari Cook and went to the beach. And that was a fatal night for her. That was the night that she was strangled and her head was held underwater in Lake Michigan. And then when she became lifeless and dead, the two men drove her car to dump her body. So far we've heard from witnesses who found the body, who responded to the scene. And right now, let's go back into the courtroom live and hear what this evidence is and what that bag is and why it's significant that we see on the screen. Let's listen in. Welcome back to the Law&Crime Network. Right now, we are watching a prosecution witness on the stand, Detective Daniel Shore, opening another piece of evidence being admitted by the state. The first piece of evidence we just saw was a bag within a bag. It was the body bag that they used to wrap up the victim, Olivia McKay, when they disposed of her body. With me, Linda Kenney Baden. Question, Linda. They took pictures. Mm-hmm. In the pictures that we saw, it looked like the bag was on and the bag was off. Why is that significant? When should the bag be taken on and off the victim?
Okay, so you definitely take pictures when how you find the body with the bag on. And of course you want to see who it is, but there's a real question about whether or not you remove that bag at the scene, because if you remove that bag at the scene and not at the medical examiner's office, then you may lose evidence within that bag. So that becomes an iffy issue. If there's any indication that a defense attorney, someone like me, could go after that as losing evidence. So usually the medical examiner controls the body and what's on the body. So technically that bag should have gone with the body to the medical examiner's office, but most cops will take it off at the scene and take pictures.
And that looks like another bag within a bag that was just admitted. So they must have wrapped the body in two large plastic bags. That is now state's evidence. Let's go back into the trial live and listen in. Welcome back to the Law&Crime Network. With me on set is Linda Kenney Baden. That's who you just saw on screen. We are watching and following closely our main trial. Hey, Linda. Yep.
Another terrible case.
We're going to go. Yep.
Not that any death is good. But, you know, you just see these young people, and it just tears at you.
It is so sad. It is so sad. And for those of you just joining us, before we go to a break, a quick recap. This is the case out of Wisconsin. Daniel Tate, 20 years old, is standing trial for the murder of Olivia McKay. He strangled her allegedly and drowned her and then disposed of her corpse. So we're following this closely. Opening statements was today. We had some prosecution witnesses on the stand just now admitting evidence. We're going to throw to a quick break, then go back into live testimony in trial and some in-studio analysis. Stay tuned. Thank you, Anthony. That was a great summary of this Marine murder trial. It is on verdict watch right now. The jurors yesterday were given instructions, and our own Anthony Velez, who just did that package, was here until 11 p.m. last night while the jurors were deliberating, and the jurors are still deliberating. With me on set is Linda Kenney Baden. Linda, criminal defense attorney. What do you make of the jurors out still deliberating? You know, they're obviously hung up on something.
Well, no, it's a death penalty case. And, you know, jurors really take their duty very seriously. And so they have to they want to make sure, number one, they have the two right suspects here if they're going to convict them. And then I think they probably want to make sure that they have the right shooter, because remember, there's two people involved and there's issues of felony murder here. And they're probably struggling with, well, if there's only one shooter, do we convict both of them and then they're both eligible for the death penalty? They may not say it aloud, but jurors tend to struggle with that. So I think there's a lot of issues to struggle with to make sure that when they get to the death stage, if they get there, that they have the right two people.
Right, and I think the key is if they get there, right? Because if they find them guilty, that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to get the death penalty, right? So it's like another mini trial.
There's another proceeding that goes along where they have to discuss what's called aggravating factors, and here there are. The felony murder, the robbery is an aggravating factor. They have to discuss whether there's mitigating factors. They have to weigh the aggravating versus the mitigating and then come to a conclusion.
Right. Okay. So another case that we're on verdict watch right now is Gebhardt, the Timothy Coggins case. The defendant is named Gebhardt. It's a 1983 cold case out of Georgia, a racially motivated cold case. Until now, it might close. Frankie Gebhardt is on trial for slicing and stabbing more than 30 times the defendant, Timothy Coggins, and then allegedly tied him up to the back of a truck and dragged him up and down a rural road, and then that's where he was dumped, mutilated, covered in blood, covered in mud. Really, really sad case. We're covering a lot of these sad cases today. This happened in a town outside of Atlanta in Georgia, in a town called Sunnyside, and supposedly the motive was because he was socializing with a white woman. 35-year-old case may close today, may not. We're keeping a close eye on this one to see if we have a guilty verdict. But we do have a package as well on this one to throw to, so let's go take a look at that and look at how it's summarized. Thank you, Anthony, and welcome back. This is another case that we are on verdict watch for. With me on set is Linda Kenney Baden. Linda, you know, few cases get colder than this one, right? I mean, 35 years, you go through witnesses that either lost their memory, evidence gets stale, DNA either doesn't exist or it's too late to collect. I mean, what do you make of this one and the fact that the jury's also been out on this one for more than a day?
Well, let me put it this way. This is a 1980s case. It's appalling that this kind of activity occurred against this young man for racism in the 1980s, putting aside whether these defendants are guilty, right? But, of course, they come forward with the snitch who's in jail, but the snitch has credibility here, and the reason why is this. These two suspects on trial were suspects from day one. They've always been suspects. And I think I saw some of the police officers, sheriff's department said they only had two people in those days and they really couldn't do the investigation they wanted to do. It's really no excuse.
Right.
It's really no excuse.
And it's important to bring up in this case that there are charges for obstruction of justice and a botched investigation as well, which the state is bringing up and apologizing to the jury, saying, you know, we don't really have, but do you think it's working in their favor? I mean, you know, if you watched closing arguments yesterday, the defense put on a really strong closing with reasonable doubt all over it.
Sure, they're going to put on a closing that the snitch that came forward has a reason to snitch because he wants to get out of jail.
Right.
He's not, you know, he's done these terrible things against kids, and he wants to be out of jail. But the fact, we go back to the fact that there's a lot of statements to a lot of different people over the years, and they were proud of it. If these two people are guilty, they were proud of it.
Do you think that there's a good chance of having a guilty conviction? I mean, we're just relying on admissions, basically, right, through jailhouse inmates.
I know.
I mean, that's all we have.
That's exactly it, and it depends on whether the jury believes that the admissions and the snitch are just valuable, and whether they're reliable, and whether one complements another. For me, it would be enough. And I'm a defense attorney, okay? But I don't know about a jury. I mean, you know, there was a lot of racism back in the 1980s. Let's hope it's not there now.
Right. Okay. And another trial, our main trial, so we're on verdict watch on 2, which we just recapped, and now we're following 2 new trials which started today. One of them is out of Wisconsin. This is a murder that happened on the beach. A woman, Olivia McKay, was strangled and her head was put underwater before she became lifeless, and then once lifeless, they took her, wrapped her in garbage bags, put her in her own car, drove her to a place where they thought the body would never be found, and dumped the corpse. We have a special report on that. Let's take a look.
Law&Crime now takes you inside the trial of the 2017 murder of a teenage girl underway in Wisconsin. 20-year-old Daniel Tate's accused of choking and drowning 17-year-old Olivia McKay in Lake Michigan. The two had met online. Tate's alleged to have arranged to meet McKay in a park in Kenosha County, Wisconsin, along with a friend. After Tate killed her, prosecutors say, Tate and his friend put Olivia's body in the trunk of her car and dumped it in a rural area. Much of the state's argument in charging Tate comes from a confession of that friend, high school senior Jamari Cook, who claims he was there when Tate met with McKay and watched him murder her. Cook's expected to testify for the state, but the defense says he's not credible. Prosecutors say the defendant, Tate, had a history of choking women during sex and may call 3 witnesses who claimed Tate choked them during consensual sex. Daniel Tate's charged with first-degree intentional homicide, hiding a corpse, and taking a vehicle without consent. I'm Dan Abrams for Law&Crime.
Welcome back. I'm Carissa Kranz. We are on that trial live. They are on break right now, but with me on set, Linda Kenney Baden. Linda, yes. Let's talk about this case for a second. So the judge is allowing in testimony of a history of choking, a history of, you know, having that kind of propensity during sex.
Right, violence against women.
How do you let that in?
Well, because it goes to his modus operandi, as they used to say in the Latin. The way he perceives women, the way he acts towards women. I think it's perfectly allowable in. But as a defense attorney, I'm going to use it to say, hey, that's what he did because it wasn't murder against this. It wasn't intent against this particular victim. It was specifically, that's what he did during sex, and therefore it's manslaughter. That's what I argue. So I try to turn the prosecution's view on its head.
Yep. Well, you're obviously a very good defense attorney, that you would turn that around. I hear the control room in my ear right now, but I think the next thing that we're going to go to is another trial that we're covering live. It's a case out of Florida. It is a baby. Aiden McClendon was shot and killed multiple times. He was caught in crossfire due to gang-related activity to gain status in a gang, and the target was a rival gang. Really heart-wrenching story. Earlier today we heard testimony and opening statements from the mother and the great-grandmother who were in the car with the baby when he died. Very, very sad, or when he was shot. He was pronounced dead at the hospital after surgery. Let's take a look at this special report. Thank you, Rachel. Really a sad, heart-wrenching case that we're watching unfold in front of us. I mean, just shouldn't happen. Babies should not be victims to gang violence. There's something we need to do about that. But right now, all we can do is watch this trial live as it unfolds. With me on set, criminal defense attorney Linda. Thank you for staying with me. You know, so we heard from the mother and we heard from the great-grandmother, both of them tearful, emotional testimony today.
Just like you were crying at the break.
I was, yeah, when I was
tearing.
watching it, I was tearing up. I held it together for the cameras. But yeah, I mean, how can you watch that and not feel totally helpless?
And the great grandmother, Mary Thomas, she was so dignified, wasn't she? And she talked about how she bent down and then she's trying to, the shots rang out, she's trying to comfort Aiden. She just thinks he has just a graze on his head, and the mother is screaming, and they become extraordinary people. The mother's driving to the hospital on asphalt, metal to asphalt.
I know, so many gunshots.
Many gunshots, right?
They shot the tire.
They called 911, but the mother and the great-grandmother, they become these extraordinary people in time of just horrible, horrible actions against a 22-month-old kid. I mean, if we don't protect our kids as a society, what do we do?
And I think what you said is important. You know, it's an opportunity for people to rise to the occasion. When you see ordinary people rise under extraordinary circumstances to have an extraordinary response, like you said, being able to drive to the hospital with metal to the asphalt because they shot the tire out, hearing the baby take his final gasp and then slump over, calling 911, keeping it together to make it to the hospital, to pass the baby off to the nurse, and to just get out of the line of fire.
And then be such an effective witness, right? Be an effective witness on that stand. And you just heart went out there. You cannot watch these type of cases on Law and Crime Network and not be hurt, affected, whatever you are, by seeing.
Well, and that's so sad. I mean, this is a transferred intent case. I mean, the target was another family member who was in a rival gang, but in this case, a baby, an innocent baby, 22-month-old, Aiden McClendon, was shot and killed. There's just no justice here in this situation. We're going to continue to cover these cases, but we're going to go to a quick break now, so stay with us.